Hi all. Understanding modernism is essential to understand 20th century culture and every aspect of life. Without understanding modernism, we will not be able to grasp the lifestyle or the culture of 20th century society. So, what is modernism? The Oxford English Dictionary identifies modernism as the portmanteau term for any of the various movements in art, architecture, literature, etc., generally characterized by a break with the classical and traditional forms or methods of expression. If you look at the definition, you'll be able to find that it's not easy to define the term modernism because here the definition says any of the various movements in art, architecture, literature, etc. So, of course, modernism encompasses various other fields of study. Like it is not confined to literature alone, architecture, painting, music, art, and so many other fields of culture. And it generally characterized by a break with the classical and traditional forms or methods of expression. But if you look at this part, this will makes us confused because under this definition we can even include some other theories, some other movements as well. For example, romanticism emerged as a break with the classical and traditional forms and so many other movements. So it is not easy to understand modernism with a simple definition because it encompasses various fields and various genres, not only in literature but other aspects of life. So let's see what is modernism and various figures associated with literary modernism. So in Peter Barry's beginning theory, he describes modernism as that earthquake in the arts which brought down much of the structure of pre-20th century practice in music, painting, literature and architecture. So it was like an earthquake in the arts which brought down the structure of pre-20th century practices in music, painting, literature and architecture. One of the major epicenters of this earthquake seems to have been Vienna, but the effects were felt in France, Germany, Italy, and eventually in Britain and in art movements like Cubism, Dadaism, Surrealism, and Futurism. So the center of the movement, maybe we can say it is Vienna, but the effects were felt in various other countries, European countries like France, Germany, Italy, and also in other art movements like Cubism, Dadaism, Surrealism, and Futurism. And the time period is between the high period of modernism. Can be we can put it in between 1890 to 1910, but later it has some kind of a revival as well. So we need to understand other movements like Cubism, Surrealism, Dadaism. Dadaism made use of various experimental strategies and Surrealism, which was an avant-garde movement in art and literature, which sought to release the creative potential of the unconscious mind, for example, by the irrational juxtaposition of images. And Futurism was an early 20th century artistic movement centered in Italy that emphasized the dynamism, speed, energy, and power of machine, and the vitality, change, and restlessness of modern life. So, what were the effects of modernism in various fields? Melody and harmony were put aside in music. Perspective and direct pictorial representation were abandoned in painting in favor of degrees of abstraction. In architecture, traditional forms and materials such as pitched roofs, domes and columns, wood, stone, and bricks were rejected in favor of plain geometric forms, often executed in new materials like plate glass and concrete. And in literature, there was a rejection of traditional realism in favor of experimental forms. So we come to literature. The period of 1910 to 1930 is considered as the period of high modernism and the high priest of modernism. I will introduce some of the figures here. Uh, T.S. Eliot, he was a critic, poet, dramatist, and he has contributed in various fields. His The Wasteland is a classic work of literature. Then James Joyce's Ulysses, Finnegan's Wake. These are all very prominent works. Ezra Pound was being the editor of the Wasteland and also a poet himself, a very prominent poet himself. Then Wyndham Lewis, Virginia Woolf, again a literary critic, novelist. Wallace Stevens, Gertrude Stein, Marcel Proust, Stefan Mallarmé, André Gide, Franz Kafka, Rainer Maria Rilke. So these are the some prominent figures. Then what are the characteristics of literary modernism? When we talk about modernism in literature, what are the major features, characteristics of literary modernism? First of all, it gave a new emphasis on impressionism and subjectivity. That is, on how we see rather than what we see. So it gives a kind of an impact or importance to the internal aspects. For example, the use of stream of consciousness technique, the internal monologue of the characters, the impressionism and the subjective nature of. Secondly, is a movement, especially in novels, away from the apparent objectivity provided by such features as omniscient external narration, fixed narrative points of view, and clear-cut moral positions. Okay. So, in the past, in novels and all that, there were this omniscient, all-knowing narratorial voice, fixed narrative points of view, and some kind of moral positions. But with the coming of modernism, they rejected all these. They moved away from such aspects. Thirdly, a blurring of the distinctions between genres so that novels tend to become more lyrical and poetic, for instance, and poems more documentary and prose-like. So the distinctions between genres such as novels, poetry, such distinctions were eroded in the modernist period. Fourthly, a new liking for fragmented forms, discontinuous narrative, and random seeming collages of disparate materials. So they gave emphasis to experimentation with various styles and fragmented forms. And fragmentation itself is a very crucial feature of modernist writing. And the last feature is a tendency towards reflexivity so that poems, plays, and novels raise issues concerning their own nature, status, and role. So in the past, we can see an all-powerful authorial voice, and he is giving an all-knowing narratorial position. But here, the works they started talking about its own nature, self-reflexive. Poems talking about its own ways of narration, novels talking about the inability to come up with, for example, the titles like Six Characters in Search of an Author, such kinds of no you can find various such strategies in which certain novelists they say that they may come out with some kind of an argument within the text that it is not under their control. So such kinds of strategies and self-reflexivity is a nature of literary modernism. These are some of the features of literary modernism, and we'll be seeing some other features in the next video. Thank you. Thank you all.